Good morning. Welcome everybody to the Jonathan and Barbara Silver Foundation. My name is Michael Brenson, and I'm here for the next conversation in our series of conversations about Jonathan Silver's work. And it's a pleasure and an honor to have with me today Tom Otterness, a sculptor who probably doesn't need much introduction to many of the people watching. Tom was born in Wichita, came to New York City 1970, studied at the Art Students League and then at the Whitney Independent Study Program. And in the late 70s, it was a particularly dramatic and dynamic time in New York. He was a member of the legendary group Collab and was also involved with the legendary Times Square show. I became aware of Tom's work in the early 80s when I saw it at the Brooke Alexander Gallery and followed it through several shows there, and then through the Marlborough Gallery and also through his public art commissions, through which he's probably best known to people watching the Real World at Battery Park City, and Life Underground and the subway station, 8th Avenue subway station on 14th Street. They're works that have given a tremendous amount of pleasure to a great many people. I think Tom probably saw Jonathan's work for the first time in 1989. He saw the lower room at the Sculpture Center, and was taken by that, and he met Jonathan after that. And then in 1991, when Jonathan got sick, he mentioned Jonathan's illness to Coleen Fitzgibbon, his wife, a filmmaker, and they started to put together material for a film. Thank God, and we're all enormously grateful to them for doing that. And Coleen made the film. It came out, Jonathan Silver, Infidel, in the studio, and it's really one of the essential documents of Jonathan's work. I can't imagine Jonathan's life and career without it. So as a gift for working on the film, Jonathan gave Coleen this work, this head, wax, I think, head in a coffee can with plaster. Tom and Coleen gave the work back to us, and I thought it would be great to talk with Tom about this work and all sorts of other ideas about Jonathan and his process that come out of it and come out of thinking about what it is, what was involved in doing it. So he agreed to be here. Thank you. And I think the first question, we need to give people some idea of what they're actually looking at. But my first question to you is, what do you see when you look at this work?
It seems like it's in the studio. That was what was so impressive about first seeing Jonathan, that live clay. I thought, oh, this is not sculpture finished and put in a gallery. This is sculpture that's being made as we watch him. And in a sense, that's what this is too. It sort of leaves all the evidence of a studio practice. Everything about it makes me think of a sculpture studio. The wax casting, the plaster. Of course, you put a rod in it to keep it up, and then you go, oh, how do I? Oh, there's a coffee can. Okay, put it in the coffee can. Throw some plaster in there. It's very pragmatic in that way.
What are your thoughts about the wax mold? Does it really come out of a rubber mold? Like how do we get to this point of a wax head, and then a head where there are these lines and splotches of plaster that are attached to and embedded in the head?
It's if people may not know, I think this work would begin in clay, and The original, what is now wax, would start in clay, and then maybe the rubber mold was on that. And then wax cast in each half, which would be divided here. And thrown together, pieced together around a plaster core, putting plaster on the inside before you demold it. Maybe he did that to keep it firm. I'm not sure what.
And then if you would do the wax on the way to bronze.
Yeah,
right.
That would be a typical thing.
So the fact that the plaster survives, is that indication like he made the wax and then decided that the wax he liked the wax and it was a work in itself and he wasn't going to do the bronze?
I think he probably decided that from the get-go.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, when he cast that, it's a pretty thick wax, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Probably not so proper for a good bronze casting. I think he went to it. It's sort of a Madara Rosso thing,
Mm-hmm.
The wax, especially this color of wax, is so flesh-like. Wax could be any number of red and all kinds of different colors. So I think he probably made it with the intention of making an object out of the wax.
So, and you have a sense that probably he would have done that, he would have had that idea at the beginning. So this would be a process that you would follow on the way to the bronze. But then he had an idea that he was going to stop here, that the wax was the image that was really going to interest him? Or do you think that this was an image then that he made the wax and then he thought, I really like this, and so I'm going to stop here, but maybe it wasn't
first intended for
right. Yeah. That he made it and then he like fell in love with it. Because if he made small bronze heads in the late 60s, 66, 68, and this is a work like on the scale of those works. But as far as I know, there's no bronze that looks like this.
That was my question.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't know, because that is the beauty of the sculpture, is that you can go in all these paths. You can take this path, but you could also cast it in bronze. I would go back again to think that he probably decided what direction he was going before he did the casting, because he selected a certain kind of wax for that casting.
Mm-hmm.
You normally do they use a bright red or a different hardness wax. This seems like a little more malleable, and it's thicker than you would use for a bronze. So my take is he wouldn't have gone into this thinking maybe I'll go bronze, but then he saw it and I really liked it. I think he went to it going, I'm going to make this an object of its own, and I'm going to choose that wax. I think it's probably a beeswax.
Mm-hmm. And it looks thick, like all the way through, right?
My impression is maybe not all the way through, but thicker than you would normally.
Mm-hmm.
You use a thin casting for a bronze, and a 1/4 inch-ish, 3/8.
So do you?
Also, I think as he's casting, I think he might have put the plaster in it before he demolded it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. In order, is that a fixing agent, or is that an aesthetic decision, or is that a technical decision?
He could have done it the other way.
Mm-hmm.
So he could have demolded it, put the wax together, and then poured plaster in.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe it went that way.
Yeah, so I guess my question is what it might have meant to him to have stopped the process at this point, whether it's almost like he's got the head, it's kind of a head that it's like in process in some way.
Yeah.
It's not, you've got the sockets for the eyes, you've got the nose, you've got like the hints of the features, but the features haven't really happened. So stopping the process with the wax before it gets to bronze, it's also what, preserving something before it's finished. Is it like rescuing it also from, a point where it goes into bronze and it becomes a more finished work, and then in bronze, like there's a certain expectation of finish or completion when it goes to bronze, so that there was something where he wanted to keep it in the process state, keep it in the process where it was still happening or incomplete. I don't know. I mean, I'm wondering about the idea for him, about the idea with stopping it at bronze and keeping it where it is, if that had any particular meaning for him, like it must have.
Yeah. And I was going to say the things like the decisions about the eyes and the incompletion, that would have been in the clay before the mold. So he would have, it's like a moving process in time, the making of the sculpture, and we're always thinking, oh, this is so nice, I wish I could catch this, but I got to keep moving forward. It's all constant kind of, I wish I could get a snapshot of this and then a snapshot of that, which now scanning does allow you to do, which is kind of interesting. You can scan it at these different stages, but that couldn't be done then. So,
well, maybe I bring out this other head, and we kind of know. I think this 66 or 68. Chris Cairns has talked about the dating of this, and then it got cast at Haverford in bronze, where this is. It seems clearly a self-portrait, and it's a completed image. The features, there's an actual person there. It's very similar in size. And then this is sort of, if you start with clay, this is what you would expect, to wind up with. And then this would be a work that would, let's say, go out into the public domain or meet the world in a certain way. It could even, perhaps have a kind of commercial value in the world. It's a bronze head. And then you have this, which I would imagine was made at a similar time.
Yeah.
But the process is stopped well before that. And as such, it remains in wax. It remains like a kind of private icon almost, I'm not sure. So that it has a privacy to it, like a different kind of dimension, a different way in which it exists in the world from this. And it's interesting, like he made a number of casts of this head. He gave it to people. He gave, if he really cared about the people, it became a gift that he gave them. This was a gift to Coleen. There's a second work like this, which is blacker wax, that he gave to Paige Tooker. So I guess there are a lot of questions embedded in what I'm saying, including like the ultimate purpose of a work like this, like who it was made for, what it was made for. It seems so personal.
Yeah.
And by keeping it in wax and putting it in this coffee can, where undoubtedly he drank this kind of coffee. This is what kept him up all night, espresso. And it's for him, So I just wonder if you have any thoughts about this sort of private and public aspect of it, and the relationship between a head that seems more unfinished, although it's finished in its own way, compared with this kind of head, which is the kind of head we would expect to see in bronze.
Yeah, and this has all the seam lines, fixed, so you don't necessarily see that process when you get to the bronze, and the bronze has been finished. So it's clearly a different direction. And when you talk about it, I think, oh, this is the scale of it relative to his head, and they seem like shrunken heads. Like I don't know. There's something about it being on that stick in the can, but I it's also its delicacy. It remains vulnerable, which is a whole different thing than the bronze casting. It's like invulnerable. It can't be destroyed. This can be you hand this to somebody and you've got to count on them taking care of it, you know, and you've got to count on it being cared for in a general way by the art world, or by somebody's got to take care of it, otherwise it's too vulnerable to survive, you know.
And do you see that vulnerability primarily in terms of materials, or do you see that also in relation to the image?
It's both, certainly. I mean, if I assume all the heads are in some manner like all of the rest of us, these are in some manner self-portraits, you know. Yeah.
Yeah, I guess
I think the vulnerability is part of the content of it, if that's the question. Yeah.
And I mentioned the vulnerability in terms of image, and maybe this gets back to the scale question, which I really wanted to ask you about, because you made heads this size, and you've also made heads that are enormous.
Yeah.
So when you look at a head this scale, like what are you thinking about in terms of your own work and working at this scale?
It's funny, I'm trained to think if you want to have it look life-size, it's better be about 10-15% bigger than the life size. And this is 20-30% smaller, 20% smaller or something. So it's a different thing. But it also is something clearly you could hold, he could rotate and hold in his hands, and it's kind of to the scale of his hands, maybe more than the full scale head would be. It seemed to me something he might have worked in his lap, you know.
Interesting. And do you think of your own small heads that way too, as something that people, because of the size, they can imagine holding in their hands, so that it automatically has a more intimate and physical relation to the person who's looking at it?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the key to working things with your fingers and with your hands, is that people understand that. You know, they know that unconsciously, that is the kind of movement you would make with your thumb, or that's the kind of scale you could hold, or even if the viewer isn't a sculptor, they know something about that, I think.
I also wonder something about the scale, where there is a an obvious intimacy and a kind of way of a kind of palpability. It's the size of my hands. I could easily hold it in my hands. In some sense, I could envelop it in my hands. So there's a relationship to touch in the body, and it has a kind of intimacy and vulnerability. But I also wonder with this scale, maybe it has a kind of power as well. Maybe if the scale is right,
The kind of intensity to it.
Right. Or maybe there's something about the size of it that can give it a kind of magic.
That's why I think shrunken head. I don't know how they do it to keep the skull in there and have the head small. I don't know how it's done really, but it has that feeling of being life-size and condensed, to something smaller scale. I was also thinking, it also affects us in that maybe we feel bigger, looking at this, where a large head will make you feel smaller, so how does that affect the viewer?
Do you, I'm thinking now of those really tiny heads of Giacometti, and also thinking about this head that, this great head that Duchampillon did near the end of his life. I don't know, he called it a portrait of Gosset, Dr. Gosset, and I think ideally it was something that would be suspended, and it was about this size, and it was set up in such a way that it's set up in such a way that you could almost imagine, putting your fingers in it, and these are images of vulnerability, and there are also images of power. There's something about the scale that can seem a little bit inexplicable. You know, whereas, I mean, we're surrounded by all these like wonderful heads, which are much closer to life size, and this has something else. So I guess I'm wondering about these magical properties and wondering like what it would mean for him to make a head like this and then put it in the studio or put it in the corner of the studio and just leave it there while you're working on other things. It seems like it's got a completely different purpose.
And when you mention it, I think of these other heads at being life-size or maybe above life-size scale, but how he used to put heads on other bodies, alternately on other bodies, but he could never use this scale on a full scale. You know, he couldn't do a full-scale figure. He'd have to do, I don't know that he did a small scale figures, perhaps, but it wouldn't function that way very easily. You know, it'd be used in a figure sculpture.
So, do you think if let's say a bronze head like this had automatically, maybe it's something more commemorative or like automatically some kind of public energy built into it? So what is this then? Like, what is this? Do we assume that kind of this was something that he was making for himself? You know, really almost completely for himself, as much as an artist can make something for himself or herself. And then it would be, he would make it and it would have a place in his studio, and then maybe at some kind of really precious moment, as what happened with Coleen, you give this thing that's really being important to you to someone else. And it's so much about you, the artist, and the person that you're giving it to. And it bypasses like a whole kind of public, you know, domain or way of thinking about it. I don't know. I mean, but it's, and then it's interesting to me, like here we are, we're talking about it and it's becoming public, right? You know, by the nature of being filmed, and it'll become part of a video. So now people will see it and it will have a different like visibility or identity that it had otherwise. But I'm wondering, you know, if you can talk about this sort of privateness. I'm wondering, you must have made works yourself. You know, you sort of such a public artist in some ways that kind of are for you in the studio, and maybe people who come into the studio will see them there, but if they don't, they won't, and that's fine. Or not.
I recently found a sculpture I'd made. I'd put out in public a plaster sculpture painted silver, and somebody had immediately busted it apart. But they left all the fragments, and 40 years later, I was gluing it back together in my studio. You know, and it's like, well, that's not going out on the market. That's for me. I just like it as a remnant, as a you know, kind of archaeological dig of my own work or something. I'm not sure if that's the same track that we're on here, but
do you feel some kind of archaeological element here? I mean, we've got the head, and we've got the head on the rod, and then we've got this can.
Yeah.
You know, what is it? I don't know what kind of coffee it is. But it is espresso coffee. It's like the hard stuff. Medaglia d'Oro is what I think it says on the back. Yeah. And then, you know, and then it looks like it's filled with plaster. Do you think?
Yeah, sure.
And filled with plaster, I guess, with the idea of that the head on the rod would be put in there eventually. That's the purpose. Right.
Yeah.
But I sort of wonder, like, it's got a semi-archaeological quality to it. Like, I almost feel like I should feel more that this was something that could have been dug up.
Yeah.
Like centuries ago, but not completely.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. I mean, you know, I used to work at Natural History Museum, so this this does seem like an artifact in that way. Like if you found a fragment, you have to find a way to display it at the museum or to handle it. And you know, this might have been a solution to display some archaeological fragment. You know, they come up with some pretty clever ways to do that. But it doesn't, like a completed normal sculpture would have a bust and would sit on, it would be built to sit on a plane. And so by stopping with just the head, you know, it needs, or he felt it needed some other display. And especially being delicate, then you have to get it up and you have to have a stable base so it doesn't kick over and break the wax and all that stuff.
I guess maybe also what I was trying to ask with the archaeological question, if you've got the can, which is something that was used and no longer used, and then you've got it stuffed with just, you know, literally just filled up with plaster, these scraps of plaster. And then maybe with that idea, one would expect some notion of a ruin, but the head isn't a ruin. It's like, it's the beginning. It's something that started out like there's nothing in the features that are broken yet. It's more like the features are still happening, you know, that there's something not quite formed yet. And so it's more at the beginning. It's more like a child, you know, it's more like a baby almost as an image. I mean, there's a kind of infant quality almost of the image. So this, you know, and that kind of undercuts the archaeological. Something in here is completely new, and it's something in it suggests the very old.
But
right.
While you're talking, I'm looking at it. I'm looking at this strange side view.
Yeah, we should
this
show
cut
that.
right here, and I'm thinking, oh, there it is. He started with it in clay on the table, like that, and just modeled. There's no other reason to have this funny back of the head. You know, he would have modeled it on the table, and then had this clay or a mold made from it in that position, and then brought it up. But if you had sculpted it up, you would never leave that back surface that way, you know, with the...
Although it reminds me in a way, and I mean, it might really be a stretch, but when I think of the heads of Messerschmitt, I don't know, you know them.
Yes, of course.
And then because some of those heads, don't they actually become like birds' heads, where the back of it has, you know, has a pointed shape. So I think, yeah, I get what you're saying, and I think that that's right, and yet the shape seems to have like some sort of intentionality to it.
Bird-like or
yes,
something,
as
yeah.
well, and so it makes it, I don't want to say like a little bit between, you know, part human and part something else, but almost. And I don't know if it's like metamorphosizing into, or if it's just, but this part is strange, and you know, this cut off, this pointedness, and then the flatness, which is a bit scooped out too,
Yeah.
right? So I think you're right, and maybe, you know, that gets back to kind of where you started, which is what you with Jonathan, you really feel the making of it.
Yeah.
You feel like how it was made, and the material, and you feel the life of the studio in it.
And thinking that way, I think, oh yeah, when he put it up, maybe it was made the way I described, but when he put it up, he could have corrected it. He could come in here with tools and go, oh, that's not right. But he didn't. So I think all those references are fair. You could look at it as divided here with a second profile in the midst of growing or something, some strange bird-like image on the back, or maybe another profile, who knows.
And what do you think about that slab of plaster on the front? Just a kind of whim, like.
It's like, oops, but like a drop of paint in a de Kooning painting. I mean, you catch it, you leave
Mm-hmm.
it. It's and it's plaster at a certain, plaster goes through these stages. It's not. This is the stage where it gets workable. It's really a beautiful stage, and it's thick enough to hold itself in that position. If it was a little earlier and it was thin, it would have dripped all the way down and just been more like a paint drop. But this is really a thickening plaster that's drooping on that spot,
And does the plaster that's down the middle, that's seems to be connecting, is that like a functional plaster, like it functioning as an actual cement that holds the two parts together, or is it?
I would guess so. I would guess maybe he made this in the can, made the rod in the can first, and then took live plaster inside of each wax and squeezed it together around the core. Maybe.
And in order to put the wax on the rod, the wax has to be wet, no? Or is it fine?
The wax would have been out of the mold and cooled and pretty firm. So then you're holding, and maybe the mold would have been made probably made in two parts, and you could pull a wax from each half of the mold, and then have those two halves, fill with that kind of thick plaster you see dripping here and dripping on the head. You get that viscosity of plaster, and then fill both sides and squeeze them together. And you just have to hold it for some minutes,
But there is that gesture that you're describing, that there is real pressure in that, right? I mean, you've got the plaster there, and then you've got the two sides of the head, and you have to hold it. You have to squeeze it.
And probably these drips here are from that process. I would guess. And then he's kind of wiped it down a little bit on the edges. Oops.
Okay.
It's bronze. It's okay.
Right. I just want to keep it on its standing up.
Like this, he would have cleaned a little with his fingers,
So where does this kind of process go? Like, I mean, the work is so much about process, obviously, but so you do a head like this. It's very it's sort of improvisational, and it's instinctive, and there's a lot of conviction in the gesture. But I'm also wondering, since we're in a room full of heads, like is this really like a one-off, or is there something that you see here that can lead to ways of working? Like what is the relation between this head and these heads, which are all like clearly connected in some way? And is this like a complete outlier, or can we read the process of making in relation to the heads as a whole?
I think these are made in similar ways. You see them fragmented and kind of squeezed together with live plaster, seam lines, some more than others, but I think the same process we're talking about, him using the wax, is the same process he would use with plaster castings. They're broken, or I think he must have maybe cast the halves separately and put them together sometimes in these pieces. or clearly left the seam line that would be there from the mold, left that visible. But like things like this, where he's really taking fragments and squeezing them back together, rearranging them, squeezing them in you know, the white is is a wet plaster, and this would have been a shellac plaster from the mold, maybe. And so the fragments, and he would intentionally cut and saw and break them and shift them a little bit, and then want to hold them in place and put more live plaster in and press them in the same way we're talking with this. So,
But this seemed to be these two heads, probably from the 60s. Like then we start to hit 1970 and these other heads, and then he's much more involved with like the problems of making a head, and questions of representation, and questions of narrative, and questions of cubism too, and how you know, the positive negative form and space can actually be worked in such a way as to like restructure the form both physically and psychologically. So this is like before that. Like this is a portrait of a certain size. This comes out of that too, of an idea in the process. It's a head. The features aren't here yet, but it doesn't, and it has this terrific kind of freshness to it, right? To which the personal aspect is attached, but it's right before, I think, these other problems, issues of making a head in 1970, you know, with that whole history come to mind. Whereas here, it seems like, I'm interested in what you think, that he, you know, has an idea of portraiture, size, materials, he's just doing it. And then here we are like a few years later, and we're into a kind of research. But this is not yet that. Yeah.
And as we're talking, I think about that idea of the scale of the embryo, or this being embryonic in that way. And I'm even more touched that he chose to give that to Coleen, to like, that's something really would be deep, you know, kind of protected the embryo for all this later work, you know. And I really am touched that he would give that to Coleen. And yeah, it just seems like it must have been for him the earliest move, or one of the very early moves that led to this whole thing that happened at a bigger scale in the 70s. He must have seen this containing much of that work that was yet done.
Interesting. Because I wanted to talk to you a little bit about, get your thoughts about the notion of the gift for him. I mean, we can only speculate, but I think all the artists I know, he gave more work to people. And it wasn't just drawings, he gave sculptures, he gave a lot of sculptures to people. And I think there was a way in which, you know, for work that's this personal, there's a social dimension to it.
Yeah.
And he wanted other people to have it. And I think in certain instances, like with this work in Coleen, there's very much of a sense, this is a work that I care about, and this is very much for you.
Yeah.
This is sort of only for you.
Yeah.
And so I don't know. I mean, I know for many artists, gifts are important, what they give away, but it almost seems for him that it was particularly important. And I mean, this is for me to think about going forward, but it's exactly right what you're saying about this and Coleen, and a real gesture of gratitude to her, of a work that was important to him and had clearly been with him for a long time. But now I'm really grateful for what you've done, and I'm giving this to you and only to you. And so it had that quality of cementing a relationship, or indicating to the other person, really indicating how important that relationship was
Yeah.
for him. So these gifts were significant.
Yeah,
Right?
no, I think very important, and especially if you think of Coleen, what you described, Coleen coming at the very end of his life and recognizing him as this treasure to capture or to be a vehicle for getting out. And then, you know, I think these gifts, in a way, I would look at them like layered, you know, like, oh, there are many layers that came after this, all these other works. But at that stage, right before he was dying, he went back into the center piece and gave that to her, you know, sort of like a, what is it, artichoke or something, where you've got what's the most central piece to it, you know. So it's really special that way.
Well, we should mention in relation to what Coleen actually did, because we found out that Jonathan was in September or October of 1991 that he was seriously ill with lung cancer, and you know, then it was clear after that he was gravely ill, and for Coleen and you, because you were present at a lot of her shootings, to make that gesture to keep him alive in some way, and also to indicate to him and to the world, you're important. You know, you matter enough for me to spend all this time and effort in your studio, talking to you, talking to other people. You know, it was a gesture of love, really, on her part and your part. And so how do you give something back that, if you're the artist that communicates that, you're the level of appreciation, because it's really irreplaceable, you know, what she did. So then to look at it this way, then the head becomes that much more, I think, like emotionally significant as a gift, and also I think demands that we think about it with the seriousness with which we had, because it was a gesture that he made to her that he felt like nothing else that he had could have delivered. So you know, it's a way of indicating the significance of what we're looking at, and the significance for him of what he felt that he could give her through this, right?
I see. Yes.
Well, thank you. Thanks, you know, thanks to Coleen for giving it to us, and thanks to you for talking, for having this conversation. It's important, and I'm grateful.
Yeah, well, it's always fun to get back to his